Good evening. I'm Lisa Sugimoto. I am with PPL Consultants and have been facilitating and assisting Cerro College in their search for their next president. I wish to thank the audience for your participating in this evening's forum. And as we complete each of the forums, you are asked as a participant to go to the Cerro College website and click on Presidential Search to provide your feedback on each of the candidates. Tonight's forums will be 50 minutes in length. There will be 2 introductory questions followed by the questions that all of you have submitted to the candidate. To conclude, the candidate will spend about 5 minutes providing a closing statement, and I will be keeping time. So I would also like to let all of you know who have provided questions for this evening. There were several questions that were similar, so we attempted to combine those questions or at least make sure that all of your questions were somehow included, but we didn't want to duplicate any of them in that process. So if you don't hear your question exactly, I have not ignored them. We've worked hard to make sure that we had each question at least somehow integrated into your community questions. So I'd like to now introduce Dr. Susan Wyche to the community, and I do have your very first question. Given the qualifications and characteristics we seek in our next president, as well as institutional strengths and challenges we face, would you please briefly describe your background and how that suggests propensity for success in this very critical leadership position?
Okay. Thank you, Lisa, for that introduction and for this opportunity to talk to all of you directly, Cerro faculty and staff, and members of the local community. I'm greatly honored to be here today. Cerro is a unique college, a rural college in one of the most isolated parts of California with 6 remote satellite campuses, drawing students from the largest geographic area of any community college in the state. Its students represent a diversity of peoples and communities, including Native American, Latinx, and African American students, and work communities formed around military, agriculture, recreation, and prison operations. The geographic range, the diversity of students the college serves, and the breadth of programs it provides are both Cerro's strength and part of the challenges it normally faces. But without a doubt, the biggest challenge that the college currently faces is the impact of COVID-19. Faculty, staff, and administrators are having to develop overnight different ways to deliver instruction and services and assist students working online. Whether we move completely online, create hybrid programs, try different scheduling, or any number of the other possible solutions, we know that our approach to instruction is changing significantly. So we must reimagine how to support teaching and learning while maintaining flexibility going forward. The second challenge that I would identify, also COVID related, is the budget deficit that the state is facing because of business closures. We know this will impact the campus's programs broadly and deeply at the same time, in the years to come, and at the same time, further impact Cerro's most vulnerable students. So how am I prepared to face these challenges successfully? I've been a faculty member for over 20 years at multiple institutions serving diverse populations. I've served on or chaired every imaginable academic committee that shapes instruction. I've taught or directed programs that had to be delivered in rural and remote environments using distance learning technologies. I'm also familiar with some of the cutting edge technologies that could be employed to enhance our teaching and learning. And 8 months ago, I was working with faculty at Shasta College to launch the first synchronous Zoom-based classes offered on campus pre-COVID. And our division was already using flipped courses, video demonstrations, accelerated scheduling, and virtual reality simulators in industrial labs like welding. There's a lot of work involved to maintain quality and accessibility when you introduce new technologies. So I'll bring that experience as a faculty member and academic division dean to the many challenges that our faculty and staff face as they undertake that transition. My role here is not to be the expert, and Cerro has a long history of online learning, but to understand the effort required and see that folks have adequate support. That's important because administrators don't always understand how much work it takes for faculty and staff to manage these transformations. But I can tell you from direct experience, it requires both long hours, careful planning, and high level of dedication to student learning. Now let's talk about the budget. Governor Newsom had the choice of making budget cuts to the community colleges this year or allowing deferments until next year. He chose the latter, giving us a year to prepare for tough economic times ahead. I believe that we will need to use that time to do more than see what we can cut. We need to leverage partnerships and attract new funding to keep programs alive and provide support to students who need financial assistance. I have extensive experience with this, having personally authored over $30 million in federal grants and state grants. I brought in additional funding by organizing stakeholders around programs such as renewable energy, cybersecurity, and community health, and supporting groups such as veterans and their dependents, women and minorities, and Native and immigrant students. Here's a recent example. The logging industry in Northern California needed a new generation of heavy equipment logging operators and truck drivers. They raised money for heavy equipment faculty to lease a log skidder for a summer internship. Then we wrote a $5 million CAL FIRE grant to fund staffing and equipment for the next 3 years. That program has been recognized as a model for workforce training by the governor's office. And now equipment manufacturers like John Deere and Caterpillar are competing with each other to provide expensive equipment. Even in a tough economy, we can find new resources to develop and sustain programs for the college, but it requires looking beyond what you're given. There's other challenges I hope to discuss, but I think these two, COVID-19's impact on instruction and the budget, will be defining issues for the next 2 years. I hope this helps you understand some of the experience I bring and approaches I will take in meeting these challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Wyche. Let me ask you your second introductory question. After your first 6 months in this position, what criteria would you use to evaluate your effectiveness as our new president?
This is an interesting question because it made me think about what I would focus on in those initial 6 months. And the first thing that I thought about was how important it is to meet all the faculty and staff, visit the satellite sites, get to know the chancellor and members of the board, and of course, meet Cerro students and understand their issues. This is the time that a president meets her colleagues and constituents and figures out where to place her energies as a leader. And then my second thought was, oh my God, all of this will still be in the COVID environment. And I'll need to gather those impressions and have many of those initial conversations, either over Zoom or with people wearing masks, where I can't even read their expressions. And I'll admit that despite my comfort with technology, it was a pretty intimidating thought. And then I remembered that while working in Hawaii on major grant projects, most of my project partners were on other islands. I often didn't meet them in person, and this was pre-Zoom, so we developed our relationships on the phone and through email. By the end of the projects, if I did get to meet these colleagues in person, it was like seeing old friends. So I think the new normal, or at least the temporary new normal of COVID conditions, will quickly become immaterial, and I'll still get the sense of who I'm working with and for, and I'll be able to establish those relationships just as effectively as if things were normal. So with that preamble, here are 5 criteria I would propose at the end of 6 months to evaluate my effectiveness going forward. First, have I established integrity and trust needed to be effective as a leader? This is number 1 for me because everything else flows from it. Second, have I been effective in my communication, both to my management team, but also directly with faculty, staff, students, and community members? It's not enough to say your door is open. You need to make sure that people feel comfortable stepping through it. And more importantly, go out and meet them on their own turf. So I want to be accessible. I want to be actively out on the campus and in the community. And also I want people to know what issues are on my desk and what kind of progress we're making on those issues, so that people feel informed about what's happening at the administrative level. Third, have I listened carefully and asked the right questions in making my decisions? I've seen how easy it is for executives to make a decision on the information they're handed and miss getting critical input. So I'll be evaluating myself on whether I've asked enough questions, asked the right questions, and talked to the right people, even if those conversations are difficult. It's also important to go beyond anecdotal evidence about issues and look at the data, which often cuts through our beliefs about the jobs that we're doing. So making decisions that are justified and thorough would be, for me, an important criteria. 4, have I set clear expectations for performance that inspires others to do their best? The president moves from one issue to another in a single day and has little time to spend on any single thing in depth. So it's important she be able to hand things off to others, delegating responsibility, but with clear guidance on what is needed so that critical work gets done right. Moreover, the people who provide this support need recognition so that they feel appreciated and want to do a good job. And this is true at all levels. A campus requires all hands on deck and people committed to student, faculty, and staff success. Being able to inspire my team effectively will greatly expand my ability to handle the scope of the job. Number 5, am I seeing results where my team and I are focusing our energies? With so much on the line right now for the institution and its students, we will need to be quicker to respond to issues than in the past. In addition to delivering quality instruction and addressing budget issues, are we closing the equity gaps for our Native American, Latinx, and African American students? Are we increasing the success rate of all students on their certificates or degree goals and decreasing the time it takes them to achieve those goals? Are we providing better support to our satellite campuses for their needs? We already know that many of the key problems are, and in most cases, we have a pretty good idea of what the most effective solutions are too. So can we act with the kind of intention and speed that we showed in dealing with COVID? I think the president can set the expectations and the tone for addressing these issues, but in the end, what's important is, have we really moved the needle? The challenges I've identified will require all of us at the college to ask a lot of ourselves and our colleagues. So I want to add one other criteria that I think will be important for my success as a leader. Have I remembered to have fun and encourage those around me to have fun also? I think that one's self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Dr. Wyche. I'm so used to just calling you Susan. So we'll now launch into the questions that the community has provided. And you will have 35 minutes for the questions that they have sent us. And so let me start by asking you, and I will let you know when your time is up so you can begin your closing statement.
Okay,
so
thank
please
you.
Describe the style of leadership you seek to practice. From your experience, provide an example that successfully used that style as you engaged with your colleagues to get something done.
I have, I think, a collaborative style, but I think underlying it is a sense of empowering those around me and empowering them to do the things they want to do. When we were working on the logging program, we had 3 days to create that $5 million grant. And so I brought the faculty in, and these were faculty who, you might call them a little rough around the edges when it came to things like paperwork. And I said, we've got to figure this out together. I put all the key things we needed to figure out on a board, and we sat down and we spent 2 to 3 hours and we worked out what we needed to know, what we did know, what we wanted in the ways of equipment and other things. And we put that together, and then I was able to take that from there and write the grant and make the deadline. A few months later, we had an opportunity with the governor's task force coming up to see us. And we realized that we could maybe put a few more things that were needed. Maybe it was time to think a little bigger because we were successful with that first part. And so I told them, okay, we're going to do it again. We're going to have a brainstorming session. I'll meet you over in your area. So I walked in, and they had covered 3 whiteboards with all the information with the same categories I'd used on the grant months ago. And I realized then they'd learned it. They knew what to do. And that for me was the best kind of leadership that I can provide.
Second question. Our college has a richly diverse body of students, including a large incarcerated student population, traditional and well as online students, and a growing dual enrolled high school population. Later questions will address some of those segments specifically. The key question here is, How do you plan to unite all Cerro Community College around a shared vision for student success and equitably allocate funding to prioritize and respect the needs of our communities?
All right, that's a pretty big question. And of course, the resource question underlies everything that we do. I would say that you do have to parse things out, and you do every year have to have people come together justifying for their area what they need. They got to do it with data. They got to do it with stories. They've got to make the other people in the room understand what their needs are. And then as a community, you have to think about what's the greater good. And sometimes that means that one group gets a go ahead and gets some extra resources, and they've got a year or maybe two to get something accomplished, but they can't keep coming back. They've got to figure out how to sustain that. And so things are different from year to year and budget to budget. I think the most important thing is that you help people understand how to argue successfully for their students that they're representing, their programs, and you give them a fair hearing, and then you make the hard decisions. And no doubt about it, you always need to make hard decisions. At Shasta College, the deans and I called that our arm wrestling sessions when we took in our numbers and we had to do it. But we did it with a lot of love, and sometimes we sacrificed for one another because we saw the benefit of someone else's program.
Very good. How would you address developing a culture of community with our faculty, staff, and students?
There's a lot of ways that a culture of community develops. But I think what I've seen over years of being at multiple institutions is that it starts at the top, and that a tone has to be set from the top down, the president, the vice presidents, the deans. You have to establish how you treat people. There has to be respect. People have to feel that they're heard. You have to have clear processes. We have a lot of processes in academia that we don't make visible to people, so they don't know, for example, there's something they can appeal, or that there's something they can do about their situation. And so it's even helping them understand just how the whole enterprise works. But I think that it's a tone that's set. And then I think you have to give people opportunities to come together, staff with staff, staff with vice presidents, and the president. You have to have that transparency, and you have to have the communications that make people feel that they are included. Because if they're not hearing things and they feel excluded, you're not going to have the culture of community you want.
What is your experience with classified staff representation and involvement in a college governance process?
Well, first of all, in my long history, I've been staff, and so I recognize some of the problems from within a college, the role that staff plays, and the very important things that they do for our success. In terms of governance, it's important that their leaders get training so that the representatives can do a good job of representing, so that they know the strategies that they can employ in negotiations, and that they also recognize their responsibility to the people they serve. You can have a representative who isn't necessarily connecting with the people who have the issues. So I think in terms of what the president can do, it's really making sure that training is accessible, that there's mentoring, and that leaders who are negotiating at the table know what the job is that they're doing. And then I think that for everybody who's overseeing staff, they have to make sure that those people have time to go get that training.
Communication is an ongoing challenge for Cerro Community College. What would be your strategy to increase or enhance the quality of our communications?
Communications with the community?
I think ongoing challenge for the college, Cerro Community College itself, is what this sounds like.
Within, yes. Well, communications are always difficult because usually there's communications going on. And as I said, people, other people who don't know what's going on, feeling excluded. And one of the lessons that I've learned is where there's a void, people tend to fill it. And so if they're not getting reports back about where things are, or maybe even that something's tabled temporarily or whatever, then speculation will go in on what's happening, and it's usually not good speculation. So, I mean, it's harmful. So I think it takes time, but what's really important is that, you know, from the president on down through vice presidents and deans and others, that there is communication. You can't overburden people, but there are those, you know, there are times to put out a newsletter. There are times to just send out a quick note, hey, we're working on this, but we've run into some obstacles. It's going to take us a couple more months. Be patient. You ask people that, they will. And so I think it's providing that level of transparency. And sometimes it's just filling something in the void rather than the speculation that goes there if you don't.
How would you help us to attract new students and increase enrollment at the college's numerous and diverse sites where programs and services are delivered?
There's a lot of ways that once you get in the job and understand the community and the students, my answer would be better. But I would say this, I have in the last few months been following on social media a lot of different colleges. And one of the things I'll say is they're not using their social media nearly enough. We need, and that's where our students are. So I would say that colleges, especially if enrollments are dropping, need to get out and put the marketing out there. I would also say that one of the things we can do about enrollments is do a better job of holding on to the students we have. If you have a 40% success rate, then you're letting 60% of the people who've already shown up walk out the door. So that's low-hanging fruit, and I would say start with who you have, hold on to them, do the things that will help them be successful, and then get the word out about your great programs to the broader community. And a lot of times it's somebody's grandmother who tells their grandson, hey, look at this, look what I saw in my community education, you know, brochure. So you just got to get the word out there and then let people share it around.
How would your experience inform the ways you would cultivate buy-in from all constituent groups in developing and implementing a guided pathways program across the college's expansive service areas?
So guided pathways is something that's happening all over the country. When I was in Hawaii, we were actually a couple years ahead of California on this. Usually we were behind, so that was something we were proud of in Hawaii. But there's a lot of difficult conversations because people feel very threatened by guided pathways. What I would say is that guided pathways is a way of making our very complicated structure and offerings simple enough for someone who's coming to it for the first time. And that's why it's called guided. You're marking the path and saying, come in here. But there are conversations that have to be had, and they're difficult, and you have to go through them. You can't just say, look, Hawaii did it, Oregon did it, New York's done it. You have to have those conversations. But I would also say that I was looking at the Cerro report card, and you have more people in the undecided major than you do in any other single major. So there's a place where guided pathways could actually really benefit the students coming in because it's in the undecided category that people tend to rack up a lot of extra credits that cost them money and time. So to get buy-in, I don't know. I've watched the process a couple times. It takes time.
What is your plan to support our employees embracing equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Well, I would say right now I don't have plans, but the chancellor's office does. And that's a place that we can all start. Cerro, like every other college, already has a lot of things on the ground. I would want to look at those and see how we can enhance those. But in terms of some of the broader issues, There has been a task force that the Chancellor's office put together. They just put out their report. I think it was in May, and it was on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it identified a number of the very important ways that every college needs to be reviewing its curriculum, looking at its hiring practices. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We just need to be aware of the resources that have already been provided to us. And then I think the second thing is we need to act. It's not something that we need to have a lot of conversations about in terms of understanding. I think the understanding is there. We have a map, and we need to get going on it.
Share with us the most successful example of leading external collaborations, in effect, beyond your campus boundaries. What process did you use? What was the outcome?
So I was working with an external consultant to develop funding and programs for a food manufacturing center when I was at Maui College. And this required us to work with both the business community, the finance community, retail, and agriculture. And one of the things, maybe it's about being on a small island, but there were some histories between these groups that meant that they had a hard time talking with each other. And in fact, some of them didn't even want to be in the same room together. So the way that when we realized there was that kind of history, we started working by getting information and gathering information one-on-one, building some information that everybody could share to help get people on the same page. We help them look at that, and then we help them work towards a shared vision, which benefited everybody. And shared visions are a very powerful tool for getting buy-in, and people will go through a lot, including working with people that they disagree with, if they see that the common goal benefits them. So that's how we did it. And there were some painful conversations there, and but we got them in the same room, and I considered that a great success. And we got funding through our legislators because we built that kind of coalition, and they could see it coming from their different constituents.
Beyond addressing the impact of COVID-19, what do you see as the college's biggest challenges going forward, and what is your plan for addressing them?
Well, I think I addressed this a little bit in my opening statement, which is COVID-19 has both the instruction and learning piece. And while Cerro had a lot of people already online, it's the people who weren't online and the staff who are not used to working that way. That's where the challenge is. But I think that the budget difficulties are going to be there, and we're going to have to be looking carefully at resources. But one of the things that I took away from a mentor many, many years ago was, even in bad times, you prepare for the better times, because the pendulum is always swinging. So this doesn't mean that we look at things in a zero-sum way, but we live within our means. We're also working to see how are we going to come out of it. I want to come out of that fast when things get better, and they will, because they do.
There were several questions regarding athletics that were submitted as it relates to the student-centered funding formula metrics, equity, and student development. How would you show your support for Coyote athletics and other student activities?
Well, I guess when they hold them, and that might be for a little while, it would be show up and be a booster, and that would be a lot of fun. I enjoyed the football games at Shasta College when I was there, and it's a great way to run into your colleagues and meet people in the community. So in a very simple way, I think as president, you need to show up. The second thing is, in terms of the funding formula, I know there's some controversies around that. I'm not on top of that conversation. As an academic division dean, I didn't participate in the discussions about athletics and their funding. But I would say this, especially in rural communities, athletics is a very important thing that the college provides to the community. And it reaches out to students who would not otherwise think about the community college. So it is an important tool, not just for health and the development of people's character, but also it benefits the college as a whole. So I would be supportive, and I would try to understand the issues more deeply so that I could be a good advocate for athletics.
How will you support the creation of new academic programs to expand the college's course offerings and service to our communities?
Well, I think over the last few years, the California community colleges have gotten far more sophisticated about how they develop programs. And one of the things that you have to do is justify that program in terms of either its benefit to certain populations or, and usually always, the labor market. So we don't want to just train students in administration of justice or psychology if that's not going to help them in terms of finding a job. We want to find out what the community supports, and this is usually regional, and of course Cerro has a very broad region, so it would be drawing on a lot of different communities and their needs and understanding that. But I think that once you have justifications for the need for those jobs, then you can find the money, you can expand them.
If you were to encounter an academic program struggling to be led effectively, what would you do to enhance its growth, mitigate declining morale, protect the image of the college and the community, and hold those responsible for leadership that are accountable?
Wow, that's a lot. You packed a lot into that question. Um, Again, I mean, I can think of so many different issues that you've highlighted there. You know, is it an issue of leadership? Is it an issue of, as I said, the labor market isn't there? There's nobody hiring the students once they come in. Is it that people don't know about the program? Is it that the program has strengths in other ways, but it's not being, the instruction is not good? You have to spend some time analyzing that to understand what the difficulty is. And what I found as a dean is usually people know. I mean, it helps to pull together the data, but usually people know. And if you talk to the students, if you talk to the faculty, if you talk to people over in admissions and counseling and whatnot, you can get a pretty good grasp on what's going on with the program. But I'm not going to try to unpack that one. It's so complex. I'll just say that it takes investigation.
How do you see the role of both private and government grants increasing to sustain and grow existing programs at Cerro College?
Well, first of all, I was interested to see from the college's report card that of a large percentage, like 30% of Cerro revenues are grants. And so it's important to understand what's already being done. Some of those grants, federal grants, you just apply for year after year, they're cyclical. Others, however, they're once in a lifetime opportunities and you have to be ready to go. So federal grants, I think, always will be an important resource for colleges, especially public higher education. Increasingly, though, if you look at where the money has gone in our society, it's gone to the 1 or 2%, and they have created large foundations. And if you don't know that, you won't know that the larger grants that are being made today are being made out of private foundations. And so you need to be at the events where those people are. You need to be looking at what's being offered, and you need to be aligning what you're wanting to do with those kinds of foundations. And I'm talking about like the Gates Foundation, Lumina. I mean, there's many that are offering different kinds of grants, whether it's something like environmental issues for one, or helping certain kinds of students, or it might be even something like increasing certificates and degrees. The Gates Foundation has been very big about the importance of post-high school certificates and degrees. So it's finding those sources and then aligning yourself and going after them. But those are huge and will, I think, in the next 5 years be more important than federal grants in many ways.
The incarcerated student to Education program represents a significant percentage of student enrollment at Cerro Community College. How will you support this program and tend to its continued growth and success?
So as a dean at Shasta College, I worked and had a number of students in my programs from Step Up, which is a program for the formerly incarcerated. We did not actually have programs in the prison, so I've been very, very interested in seeing these. And what's interesting is if you look at those programs and you drill down into the data where you see how the students do compared to the traditional college population, you'll find out that those students are finishing their courses, they're finishing their degrees. They're obviously very dedicated to what they're doing, and they're doing it at a higher rate than the traditional students. So that, to me, is a great reason to be there and to give those students that opportunity. They're also one of the largest, one of the few places where enrollment's really growing and growing dramatically. So I would say, let's go there. One of the things that's important to know about education and prisons is that there's very few things that they can do that change the recidivism rate, which is something like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's over 60%. It's quite high. Education gets that down into sometimes the single digits, but at least under 20. And when you're looking at that kind of change, that has huge impacts for both those individuals, for the communities they go back to, and also for the state budgets, because it's cheaper to educate them and have them out there working and being part of the community.
Numerous high schools in the college's service area have dual enrollment programs. What has been your experience with dual enrollment programs? Describe how you ensured these students were provided support from the college to be successful.
So dual enrollments are another area that's been a growth industry for community colleges. And again, it's something that if you can get students in high school to take college credits while they're in high school, they get exposure to resources they might not have otherwise have had. And it saves them an incredible amount of money on their education, and it benefits the college. So it's like a 3 or 4 way win. And yet they take a lot of time, because those even though those classes may be offered at the local high schools, they have to be the equivalent of what students are getting at the college. That's critical. So we have to evaluate them. We have to make sure the teachers are trained. We have to look at their materials and evaluate their materials. It is a very time-consuming process, but I would say that it's a great one, and it's also a way to just create connections together with the local principals and faculty. And at Shasta College, we had some remote campuses where, high school campuses, where the teacher could not meet our requirements. And so we did some mentoring and professional development. In one case, we drove a truck of supplies up so they could do the exercises they needed. So we became a resource for them. I think it's just a great thing all the way around.
Cerro serves 6 distinct campus locations, in addition to 2 prison sites and numerous high schools with dual enrollment programs. Please provide examples of how you have developed and supported educational sites, such as the Tehachapi campus and the Eastern Sierra College Center, with the potential for growth.
So this is something that would be easier to answer after I've been there a while. You need to look at the programs they're offering. You need to understand what their particular area has. And I assume that the students up at Mammoth Lake are going to be very different from the students at Tehachapi in many ways. However, Cerro plays a huge role for students in the region of the 4-year transfer. It's the place where they can get their education and get it in a way that's livable in terms of their finances, and then make a successful transfer. So it would be not assuming that those populations are the same. And then also you have to deal with the resources they have, because a lot of times A remote campus, a satellite educational center, has one, maybe two people. Everybody else is online. And so you have one person being everything up there. So you really have to get a sense of each individual station. And that means you have to drive up there and visit them and get an earful about what life is really like up there for them and their students.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Weiss. You have actually gotten through all the 17 questions. So,
Wow,
yeah.
okay.
So I guess at this time, you are now at your mark to give us your 5-minute closing statement, and I will again time you for that. So when you're ready, let me know.
Okay, thank you. I think that I can say without exaggeration that I have experience with all facets of a college campus from the ground up. Literally, the soil it's built on to the electrical grids that make it function. And I have experienced it as a student, faculty member, administrative staff, and academic executive. And that makes more sense if you know that I ran my own business in landscape design and really did know soil. I've led departments and divisions in both liberal arts and career and technical education. I've prepared budgets. I've acquired millions of dollars for facilities and college projects. I've negotiated community partnerships with industry, pioneered pedagogical approaches that are front and center for community colleges today, served on executive teams at both the community college and state system level, and most important of all, worked for student success in all that I've done. I've worked on K through 12 projects, and I've been a tenured professor at both four-year and research universities. So I have familiarity with our educational system from kindergarten to graduate school, and a good understanding of the role, the very important role that community colleges play for students in the local community. I've also worked in the private sector as a small business owner and a company executive, as a founder of a nonprofit that built and managed school gardens for elementary and middle schools, and I've served on community economic projects in those roles. My colleagues tell me that I've left every college I've served in a better place than when I arrived. If that's true, that's a reputation I'm proud of. What I'm equally proud of is that I developed a strong network of colleagues and former students who are part of those endeavors. I recently received a surprise honor from the Sierra Cascade Logging Conference for an outstanding contribution to their industry for my work on the logging operators training program that I described. When I accepted the award, I told the audience I was probably the first recipient who was also a liberal arts professor and a supporter of the spotted owl. This is true, and they laughed and they let me keep the award anyway. The best reward of all is not only to have made a difference, but to have made great friends along the way, including friends with radically different perspectives. I know Ridgecrest has recently experienced community trauma with last year's earthquakes. It just so happens that today is the second anniversary of the Carr Fire, when over 38,000 people in Shasta County had to be evacuated, many losing their homes to the fire. For 2 weeks, our community college transformed into the county's evacuation center, housing over 1,000 people in the college gym and cafeteria. First responders used our campus as one of their main staging areas. As a member of the emergency management team, I was assigned to spend 12 nights of 12-hour shifts with volunteer faculty overseeing a barn pavilion filled with 100 people, many of them chronically homeless, with their animals from which they refused to be separated. We had someone on oxygen who was terminally ill, several people going through drug withdrawal, and we coped with triple-degree temperatures, heavy smoke, and dehydration. We rallied for the community, and they rallied for us. People heard about our effort and showed up in the middle of the night bringing dog and cat food, extra cages, or just came by to see if we needed anything. I realized then how important a community college can be, especially in a rural community, because of resources that it can provide during an emergency. I hope I never have to serve again in that capacity, but I have the training if needed, and I would make that training a priority for my team as well. If I have the privilege to be your president, I'm going to work hard to earn the trust of students, faculty, and staff at the college. We're going to be facing a lot of tough issues together in the next few years, and my decisions may not always be popular, but I guarantee you they'll be carefully thought out and as fair as I can make them. For the community, my door won't just be open. I'll be out wearing a mask, at least at first, meeting you and getting your input on how the college can build a stronger and more resilient community. Whatever decision is made in this search for Cerro Coso's next president, I wish the college and the community well. This has been a great learning opportunity for me, and the next president will be lucky indeed. I would be honored to join the team and be part of the multiple communities that Cerro Coso serves. Thank you all for listening and for contributing your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Wyche. Appreciate your time. And audience, again, I'm reminding you to go to the Cerro Coso College website so that you can provide your input. And at this time, thank you again, audience. And we have one last forum this evening. So good evening to those of you who have to leave, and thank you for those who will stay around. And thank you, Dr. Wyche, again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.